Marcus had always prided himself on his ability to follow instructions. It was what made him good at his job as a surgical consultant, what kept his relationships measured and respectful, what guided him through life with a careful, deliberate hand. So when Elena whispered those words, "Please don't look at my face," he should have known to honor them. He should have simply held her hand in the darkness of her hospital room and waited for whatever came next. But love, as he would come to understand, was not always obedient to reason. They had been together for 3 years, though in many ways, it felt like a lifetime compressed into moments. Elena had the kind of presence that made you forget to check your phone, the sort of laugh that could rearrange your entire understanding of what joy meant. She worked as an artist, painting murals on the sides of buildings, transforming blank concrete into worlds of color and meaning. Marcus had first seen her suspended from a harness 40 feet above the street, surrounded by scaffolding, completely absorbed in her work. She had looked like she was dancing with the sky.
The accident happened on a Tuesday.
A car had jumped the curb outside her apartment building. Elena had pushed an elderly woman out of the way, and in doing so, had taken the full impact herself. The doctors told Marcus she was lucky to be alive. They spoke in clinical terms about lacerations, fractures, reconstructive surgery, and rehabilitation. They showed him charts and prognosis reports, their voices steady and professional. What they meant, though Marcus could read between their careful words, was that her face had borne the worst of the trauma. For the first week, she wouldn't let anyone see her. Not her mother, not her sister, not even Marcus. Nurses would change her bandages behind closed doors. Visitors were politely but firmly turned away. Marcus sat in the waiting room for hours at a time, reading books he didn't absorb, drinking coffee that grew cold in his hands, wondering if the woman he loved was slipping away from him in a room just 50 feet down the hallway. On the 8th day, she agreed to see him. The nurse gave him careful instructions. Elena had requested that the lights remain dim. She would keep her eyes closed. Marcus was to sit beside her and hold her hand if she wanted him to. The nurse's tone suggested these were not merely requests but boundaries that should not be crossed. Marcus nodded, understanding that Elena needed to control the terms of their encounter, that whatever shame or fear she was experiencing, it required this careful choreography. He walked into the room expecting to feel devastated. Instead, he felt something more complicated, a sharp awareness of his own helplessness, the strange vulnerability of being needed without knowing quite how to help. Elena lay in the hospital bed, her head turned toward the wall, her breathing shallow. Only the left side of her face was visible, and even that was obscured by bandaging. Her left eye was closed, swollen. Her arm, which hung at her side, was wrapped in gauze. "Hi," he said softly, pulling the chair close to her bed. She didn't turn toward him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry you have to see me like this." "You don't need to apologize," Marcus said. He reached out and gently took her right hand, the one that had less damage, and held it carefully.
"You're alive. That is what matters."
"Don't," she said, and there was a tremor in her voice that suggested she was close to tears. "Don't try to make this okay."
"Don't tell me it doesn't matter. It matters to me. My face matters to me."
"Everything about how I move through the world has just changed." Marcus felt the weight of this statement settle on him. He understood then that no amount of reassurance would mean anything. She needed to be heard in her devastation, not rescued from it. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. I hear you.
This is hard."
She made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sob. "I can't paint," she said. "My right hand is fractured in 3 places. My left shoulder is dislocated. And my face." She trailed off, and he could feel her trembling. "I won't be able to look in a mirror. I won't be able to look at anyone else. How do you exist in the world when you can't stand to be seen?" They sat together in silence for a long time. Marcus didn't try to answer her question because he knew it was rhetorical, born from a place deeper than words could reach. Instead, he simply held her hand, feeling the irregularity of her pulse, the slight coolness of her skin, the simple fact of her presence. 2 weeks into her recovery, Elena asked him to do something she had been building toward. "Please don't look at my face," she had said, and in that moment, Marcus realized these weren't rules she was establishing to protect herself from his judgment. They were rules she was establishing to protect herself from witnessing her own reality reflected in his eyes. If he didn't look, perhaps she could pretend, for just a moment, that nothing had changed. He had promised to respect her wishes. But as he sat there holding her hand, as he listened to her breathing in the darkness, something shifted inside him. He thought about all the ways he had looked at Elena over their 3 years together. The first time he had seen her across a crowded room, the way she looked when she was absorbed in painting, the expression on her face the morning she had told him she loved him. He thought about how his gaze had always been an act of love, not judgment. And he thought about the woman in front of him, terrified that the damage to her exterior reflected something true about her interior, that her worth had somehow been diminished by circumstance and chance. He reached up slowly, his hand trembling slightly, and turned her face gently toward him. "No," Elena whispered, her eyes still closed. "Don't." But he was already looking. The bandages covered most of the damage, but what he could see was bad. The visible part of her left eye was bruised and swollen. The right side of her face bore long red marks where the stitches still held her skin together. There was something raw and vulnerable about seeing her like this, reduced to biology and trauma, stripped of the familiar presentation she offered the world. And then she opened her eyes. Marcus fell to his knees. It wasn't the sight of her injuries that brought him to his knees. It was the devastating recognition of the person looking back at him. All her fear, her shame, her desperate hope that he might see her as more than the sum of her wounds. It was the realization that he had been given a glimpse of her at her most vulnerable, her most human, and that in that vulnerability, she was more beautiful to him than she had ever been. He knelt there beside her bed, his vision blurring with tears, unable to find words large enough to contain what he was feeling. It wasn't pity, though compassion was part of it. It was something closer to awe at her courage in letting him see her, awe at the courage it would take to rebuild her life from this point forward. "I love you," he said, and the word seemed both completely inadequate and entirely true. "I love you. Not despite this. Not in spite of this. Right now, in this moment, looking at you like this, I love you." Elena's eyes filled with tears, and she didn't look away. Instead, she held his gaze, and for the first time since the accident, something in her face shifted. Not into a smile exactly, but into something that looked like acceptance, like the beginning of healing. The road forward was long. Elena spent 3 months in the hospital and then in rehabilitation. She underwent multiple reconstructive surgeries. She worked with a therapist who helped her process not just the physical trauma but the psychological weight of it. There were days when she was angry, days when she withdrew, days when she wondered if she would ever feel whole again. But Marcus was there, and he learned that love was not about fixing someone, not about making them feel better with words or promises. Love was about bearing witness, about kneeling beside someone in their darkest moment and refusing to look away, about understanding that our greatest moments of connection often come not when everything is beautiful, but when someone trusts us enough to let us see them when they are not. Years later, after Elena had healed, after the scars had faded to faint lines that only she could really see, she would paint a mural unlike anything she had created before. It depicted a moment of profound connection between 2 figures, one kneeling, one vulnerable, with light breaking through darkness between them. She called it, "The Weight of Seeing." Marcus would sometimes stand in front of it, remembering that night in the hospital room, remembering the moment he understood that falling to his knees was not an act of despair but an act of grace, the grace of truly seeing another person, of recognizing their humanity in their brokenness, and of loving them not in spite of it, but in the full knowledge of it. The title of her painting had a double meaning that Marcus understood in his bones. There was weight in being seen truly, weight in revealing yourself to someone else completely. But there was also grace in that weight, redemption in allowing yourself to be witnessed in your most raw and honest form. And perhaps, he had learned, that was what love really was. The willingness to bear that weight together, and the courage to let someone else see you when you were least prepared to be seen.